What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of We Burn Blue. What's happening, Sharon?
I didn't know what I was gonna say at the open, but I like your new intro, so that's what I'm gonna say, man. It's good to speak. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, man. There's a bit of a high after the Villa result last night, which was a pretty solid game. I think you finally caught up to most of what we've played recently.
Yeah, I'm still behind a few games in terms of my quote unquote research for the pod, which is I do like to review the extended highlights, but I have watched all the games. And yeah, I was thinking about it this morning, had had the result been a little different, I think our mood would also have been a lot lower, a lot more negative. So yeah, I think, well, the Chelsea boys are lucky they've managed to secure a big dub last night.
Yeah, it was a big dub. Definitely, I think our mood would have been very affected by it because of obviously the Arsenal result before that and the draws that you called. And I begrudgingly tip my hat to you for calling those exactly as they panned out. But yeah, after those results, we needed this win, and it was made even sweeter because I went to sleep right after the game. I watched it live, and it was like what 3 a.m. by me, and I was knackered. And when I went to sleep, United were um, I guess they were level with Newcastle, and then Newcastle went on to score that winner in the 90th minute. What a banger by Osula. And I think that really was like fantastic to wake up to and see that, they're now like 3 points ahead level with Villa, and it's looking good for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you bring up United, and I don't find I'm engaging with the rest of the league this season. I mean, maybe it's just because so much shit happens at Chelsea every month that it's entertaining enough just to follow the club. But I feel like also sacking Maresca and bringing on Rosinia, who has his own kind of like limitations, or like he didn't have that big of a reputation, right? I feel like that removed all expectation for me for this season. So I actually, like, if you ask me today, I probably don't know exactly how many points Chelsea have. I know, big 3 points against Villa is basically a 6 pointer, right? It keeps us in the running for Champions League, but honestly, man, like, I'm just watching game by game to see how exactly we're changing. I'm not going to say for better or for worse right now under Rosinia, because like it's just intriguing in itself. We have a new manager now. He's had his feet under the desk for a few months, and yeah, I feel like we're going to end up where we end up. It's not as like exciting for me, and I feel like, yeah, because if expectations are much lower as a result, if we end up in the Europa League, or dare I say it, Conference League again, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. I don't know. Do you feel the same way?
No, I don't feel the same way. And I don't think a lot of people would feel the same way, including our ownership group, because I think Rosinia's come out saying Champions League is still the benchmark and the players are focused on it, he's focused on it, and I think that's fair. And I don't think that the goalpost shift. He does have his work cut out for him. There are a bunch of issues that, you pointed out yesterday as well, on Twitter that, we're still seeing. So I think we'll get into those, but overall, when you look at it from a game by game perspective, I think I understand where you're working from, but at the same time, like I do have one eye on the table. I think the way the results go is really important for us. I said on our last call that I don't think Aston Villa sustained their push for fourth, for one of those top four places, and it doesn't look like they're going to right now. Arsenal and City have pulled ahead, so it's basically the congestion is United on 51 with a goal difference of 11, Villa on 51 with a goal difference of 5, we're on 48 with a goal difference of 19, and Liverpool are also on 48 with a goal difference of 9. So that's how tight it is at where we are right now. But yeah, I mean, let's look at what we had the results since we last recorded, right? So
But hold on one sec. Just before you move on to the meat of the pod, right? Do you think, we're in March now, so do you think we achieve Champions League? Do you think he's not just talking the big bollocks, right? He's actually gonna get us where we want to go?
Um, I think we do achieve Champions League. You mean like whether we get the Champions League position, right? I think we do get that, and that's what I'm coming to. I mean, we do have. I mean, Opta rated our fixtures as one of the most difficult, right? After the after the Burnley game, we had the toughest run in, and I think that we should be able to see ourselves through it, given the position we're in right now. Had we lost to Villa, had United won, we might suddenly be finding ourselves in sixth behind Liverpool. And at that stage, with United also ahead, it may have looked more difficult. But given where we are today, I think yes, we can pull it off. What about you? You said you would be happy with Europa, but realistically, where do you think we end up?
I think I'm not really fussed. Uh, I would be happiest if we won the title. You know, everything after that is like, okay, it's whatever. I don't really have expectations of us being in the Champions League, mainly because I don't see us being Champions League level. But I do find the drop off to Europa League is a bit. There's a huge gap there in quality. So we're definitely looking like, okay, if we scrape. Actually, this is probably a question I should ask you: is fifth place going to get Champs League again?
Looks like it.
Okay, yeah. In which case, I think maybe we scrape it, and we're in fifth currently, like you mentioned. Um, I see a lot of inconsistency this season, unless you're Arsenal, and more recently if you're City. But everybody is capable of a slip up here and there. And I will say, like, on the balance of play, the Villa result last night was a little bit of a surprise, right?
Yeah, I think if I was looking at it pragmatically, which I was the last part, I called a draw. You said we're gonna lose that and we're gonna lose Arsenal. I called draws in both. Arsenal was a bit optimistic of me, but I think with Villa, I was giving them a bit of respect for the work they've done to be in the fourth position. But as I said then, and I'm saying again now, I don't think they sustained that. So given the fact that we were down a goal, we went down a goal very early. Basically we had the whole match to go at that point. I like how, the team were able to rally. There have been these defensive issues, and there were some nervy moments with Jorgensen as well. But of course, we were able to, get the first goal, get the second goal. João Pedro was looking on another level. Cole Palmer got a goal as well. I think it was a good performance. I think we needed it. So the fact that they were able to do that, it may have been a little bit of a surprise, but I think it was a time where we really needed it, and somehow we tend to show up right when the odds are against us, and that's something I'm sure we're going to discuss a little bit later when we're previewing the fixtures. But um, yeah, that's my take on the Villa game, and of course, like I was saying earlier, we have a whole run before that to look into. But what was your take? And I mean, generally, you said you've caught up to all the highlights, right? So do you want to go game by game with observations, or you want to just look at like a nutshell? What are your notes?
I've watched all the games, but memory being what it is, I really, I'll only remember Arsenal and Villa off the top of my head. That's why I like to do the review. But I think like we can talk about the games that we kind of did predictions for in the last pod, simply because we haven't actually spent a lot of time picking out like the details of what Rafinha is trying to do, how he's trying to score goals, and how he's trying to win games. And I think that's basically what defines him now as a manager at Chelsea or as a coach at Chelsea, right? Because his hands are not in many other pies, right? He is literally he is in a way he's like mainly accountable for the results. So I think we started off with Wolves away, Did we both predict wins for that? I think we did, right?
Yeah, we both predicted wins for Wolves away. I think that was an easy one with for the win, because of their form as it was. But it was still a 2-3. I mean, we beat them away 3-2, so it was still not exactly the open and shut case that you would have expected, right?
Well, I mean, it depends who you are. I always expect us to concede, which is why, like, when you ask me to do predictions, right? It's a question of can we outscore the opponents? I remember when Klopp first took over Liverpool. I think I could be wrong, memory, being what it is, and it was more of like his first few games, like first 10, 15 games, they're all like ding dong battles, like we're just gonna play blood and thunder. There's no real management of the game. We're just gonna outscore our opponents, and I think that's kind of the impression I get of Rafinha's Chelsea as well. I mean, maybe it's less blood and thunder. He has his own style of play on the ball, um, but nevertheless, like it still leaves us exposed at the back, and we are still pushing up, trying to win the ball most of the time. I haven't seen as much of the pragmatism as I was expecting from him. Like doing a bit of research into his Strasbourg days. He actually did allow them to drop into a mid to low block with a five at the back, and I think we've seen that most recently against Villa once we're trying to see out the result. But aside from that, he's still kind of employed a more mid to high block or high press on top of the defenders, just essentially to stop them receiving the ball from the goalkeeper. So all of that stuff is still going on, and it's still leaving us exposed in the transition and at the back. So yeah, when you ask me to do predictions, I'm always like, look, we're definitely conceding. It's just how many.
I guess your logic is sound. It doesn't help that you compound the fact that the system is leaving us exposed with the fact that our defenders don't always look like they're up to it, right? They always look like they're capable of these silly errors and individual mistakes that will inevitably aid an opponent to end up in goal. And then you have a keeper who can show up as like sideshow Bob or like I mean like a Buffon on his day, right? It just depends on what mood he's in. So when you have these factors at play, it becomes a little tricky to predict. I get it, but we still got to do it, right? I mean,
No, we do. Otherwise, we're not an official podcast of any kind, right? If you're not doing any sort of prediction. But yeah, anyway, we were talking about the Wolves game. Um, I think that was like one of the first games where we really tried to employ Rafinha's style going forward. And he really got the best out of João Pedro running the channels and the spaces in behind. Wolves were kind of caught between trying to press us up the pitch and playing into our hands, or dropping off deep and letting us come onto them. And our wingers just happened to have good games that day, um, particularly Neto. But I think we know why, being at his old stomping ground. So I think against Wolves, it was made easier by a little bit of petulance from their end, giving us two penalties. But nevertheless, I think like it's a solid performance. It was at that time it was definitely like, okay, this is something to build upon.
yeah, it was. I mean, I think it would definitely was something to build upon, and you come to the next fixture, right? It was Leeds at home. There is a very big rivalry between Chelsea and Leeds, of course, and I think that was a game where I was so confident we were going to get a win, and I heard this back, and I was like listening to it when you said, "Look, this is the exact game where we could go up a goal and be under sustained pressure at the end, and bang bang, we've conceded two and we've lost the game." And we didn't lose it; we ended up drawing it, but it was pretty similar, right? We ended up drawing 2-2, under sustained pressure from them, couldn't keep it out, and they scored two. So there was that, and yeah, how did you feel about that one?
I mean, again, you mentioned sharing my thoughts on X. I think we're both quite active on there around the timing of the games. By the way, with Wolves, we only conceded one. It was 3-1, and you could probably guess how they scored their goal. If I ask most Chelsea fans, like, okay, we're going to concede one goal today, where is it going to come from? Everyone's going to say, oh, it's a corner. Wolves score their only goal against us like that. Set pieces in general, like I get that we have maybe like on average a smaller, a shorter squad, but this is why you pay Mr. Cueva, the set piece coach, the big bucks, right? And the thing is, right, set pieces are such a good way, such an effective way of applying and maintaining pressure on the opposition, right? So, especially when you're away from home. So, if you look at Leeds uh, and Burnley, if I can just jump ahead a little bit, and of course Arsenal as well, they take their opportunities, and basically when they kind of just use set pieces as a way to get further up the pitch, maintain pressure on our side of the pitch, even if the goal doesn't stem from there directly, right? When I look at this Chelsea defense, I see um, like when they're facing sustained pressure, there is a tendency to wilt. That's why when I see us go into a low block, I'm always a bit worried. Like I mentioned against Aston Villa, if you're 4-1 up, right, there's a lot of cushion there, and that's also why maybe the five at the back formation, he kind of cracked it open just to try it out. And I think we might see that in future games where, he wants to start off with a bit of control, or again, we're seeing out a 2-1 lead. You might see that five at the back with the extra center back. But yeah, I otherwise, right, like in very, very tight games when we're facing a lot of pressure, I don't see us having the mental capacity to actually, fight through it defensively. It's great that they're able to then say, fine, the game's not over, even though we're down 2-1, right? Or down 1-0 against Villa. We'll turn it around. That's great. That's a great mentality to have. But the champions don't concede in the first place.
Do you think that's down to experience? The fact that we have a young squad, or do you think it's a deeper seated issue?
The experience thing is a great point. But on the flip side, I do feel like now our back line individually have played a lot of games, right? I mean, even Badiashile with all of his injuries and Fofana with all of his injuries, they've still played enough games to know, okay, we're never going to have a 90-minute game where it's all our way in the Premier League. Not at this level. The Premier League is just so much stronger than it was even like 5, 7 years ago, right? And every year, all of these teams just rack up so much money to invest in their clubs. They're bringing on better and better players every year. So I feel like the gap closes, between a team like Chelsea and a team like, I don't know, Leeds, right? So for me, they have enough experience to do it. Maybe the experience that's lacking is as a collective, right? And this is something I wanted to ask you because I haven't really been following the behind the scenes. I haven't like checked our injury table or injury list, for instance. But I'm not convinced by Mamadou Sarr. I know he's worked with Rosinha before, but our back line in the last few games has basically just been extremely inconsistent, to say the least, just by name.
Yeah, it has, right? It's been inconsistent in many ways. I think there's a lot to really talk about when it comes to the defense, right? You've already pointed out there are a lot of defensive issues in the setup. There's issues when we're defending in transition. We can't seem to defend a set piece to save our lives. Just generally, those are issues that we have. And then when we come down to individual quality, right? There's a lot of inconsistencies, sorry, there. You have Chaloba, who despite all the hate he gets, has been the most consistent defender we have in terms of availability and in terms of like performances, right? He's had his moments, and
That's
I
my
mean,
boy.
I knew you'd say that. No, he's had his moments, right? He's been consistent in that. If I had to say, he has like he'll drop like maybe three, 7 or 8 on 10 performances, and he'll have his one 4 or 5 on 10 performance. I think he's been consistent in that. That's still not what we need at this level, but at least he's been consistent in that, right? When you look at the rest of the squad, Sar had to come in and play versus Arsenal, right? I think he was culpable for one of their early attempts, if I'm not wrong, but he didn't have a bad game considering he's just come into the side. I think with him, it's early days to see how he performs. Chalaba and Sar aside, right? It's the likes of Tosin and Fofana and Badiashile who really, really like, get my goat. Um, you think back to the Burnley game, right? He's brought on Tosin for height. He's brought on I think at that point there were 5 defenders on the pitch, and we've gone and conceded because Rosinio quote unquote said somebody missed the man they were supposed to be marking. Somebody was supposed to be marking Fleming and forgot their assignment, and that's why we conceded. You can't afford that, right? And and of course, I think the fact that SARS started ahead of Tosin and Badiashile um, kind of just tells you all you need to know about their place in the team, right? I don't think that Tosin is doing a lot to inspire confidence within Rosinio. Um, Fofana is like, he manages to be uh really good when he wants to be, but again, he also is prone to these mistakes. Can manage to look like a giraffe that's just flailing all over the place at times. And of course, like the fact that he got a red card, right? You look at Burnley and Arsenal, 2 games, back-to-back red cards, where they're completely like I mean, they're completely avoidable, sorry. These are not red cards that need to happen. And I mean, we're looking at 7 red cards in the league now after Neto getting one versus Arsenal, which by the way was so freaking stupid, man. Um, and overall, if you count Maresca's red card that happened on the touchline, we're at 10 red cards this season. That's ridiculous. And I mean, I think if we manage to keep a clean sheet, avoid a defensive issue, and not concede a red card, that's looking like the standards for success right now, right?
But obviously it's a very bleak thing to say, but I totally agree with you. I find myself, obviously the games are very late for me where I am. I find myself the next morning checking first whether we've received a red card or not, post match. But I hear what you're saying, that individually, no, I wouldn't actually say anybody's done anything to suggest that they are a fixture, going into let's say next season's team, where again we get a blank slate or a fresh start in the summer. I would argue, even though Chaloba, I totally agree with you, he's the most consistent performer we have, and he should always be in a Premier League squad that's trying to challenge for the title. I think we had this discussion a while ago that perhaps he's not the starting center back in that team, but he's definitely the number 3 choice, right? He's back up to the primary 2. But the unfortunate thing is, and this is the great thing about like watching some highlights back, man. Like Fofana sometimes runs around like a headless chicken. It's like he's trying to get carded. And yeah, he is very reckless for a guy who is also so fragile. He pisses me off to no end. Every time he takes just like a little bit of an innocuous hit, he's down, and we're like, oh, is this it? Is this another 18 months where we can't see Fofana play? Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Um, so yeah, I do agree that there is some individual weakness there. But again, there's so many factors that contribute to it. It's change in management, just the top of my head, right? Even though they look similar, right, in the actions that they do, they're being asked to defend in different ways, maybe under the hood, which we don't see. And I do feel like one of the issues that has not been addressed by Rosinha is actually trying to find tactical balance in the way we play. And it leaves our defense exposed. And no matter if you have like, Fofana at his best and Chalobah at his best, I mean, Tosin at his best doesn't should not normally be walking into Chelsea anyway, but you have our defenders at their best. If they're literally being run at from both flanks with support in the middle in the counter, right? And this is actually something we saw against Villa last night. Even though they were quite timid, and to be honest, I think that's why we won, is because Villa was surprisingly timid in how they approached their play with us. When they turned the ball over in the midfield, um, and they moved it forward quickly, suddenly it's a 3v2, and you're wondering, like, how did that happen? Well, the reason it happened is because we're building up through the middle predominantly, and we're allowing, Enzo, Palma, Neto, or Garnacho, whoever it is, and one of the fullbacks to all kind of float in the attacking midfield space. And the recovery defenders are supposed to be the two centre backs. Uh, Usually it's Andre Santos, we didn't play last night, and Caicedo. Now, to get even more attacking, right, because we're so dominant, which, I say that a bit sarcastically because we're clearly being invited on so that teams can counterattack us. Caicedo sometimes will push forward, or Santos will push forward, and maybe leave a three at the back. But this three is still very narrow because we have fullbacks who are either floating and attacking midfield or trying to stretch the pitch, make it wide as make it as wide as possible, like a Cucurella, right, or a Gusto. So what that means is that the flanks are completely exposed, and that's why I was genuinely shocked at how Aston Villa were not able to make more use of it. And you give us some credit in that regard that we managed most of their transitions very well. I think Watkins also didn't really have his most clinical of days. I think even he would admit that. And then once you score the third goal and you're in control of the game, it's a different story. But this is what I'm seeing, right? If you're able to win the ball in the middle of the pitch against us, when both fullbacks are committed high up the pitch, we are so exposed down the flanks. It's actually scary to see. And then you're asking a Badia Shield or a Tosin to do recovery defending, which they're obviously, as we've seen, they're not very good at. So this is all of these things combined to our defensive record being really, really poor. But I mean, this is actually, again, what I wanted to ask you. Where do you draw the line? Like, where do you say, okay, this is actually down to an individual error? I know maybe the manager should be fixing this issue. This is clearly a tactical thing.
Um, that's a good question, man. I think so this being a tactical issue is something that we talked about even under Maresca. I remember having a similar conversation about how our approach in our setup by Maresca is what's leading us to be so exposed at the back. So I think um, you have to you have to of course say that yes, the system is doing that. That said, if the system is creating these avenues for exploitation, right? I think then Rosinia has to obviously be aware of that and has to be coaching his players in how to, be avoiding being exploited that way. And I think, you mentioned, yeah, Andre Santos had been playing. I think one thing that we saw happening with Andre Santos, and I think Rosinia also called it out. He said he's played under me at Strasbourg. He knows how I want him to basically sit in like a central center back role at times, right? So he becomes a third center back in those transitions. And I think when he's not on the pitch, Caicedo doesn't generally do that. He like I think Caicedo sits a little bit ahead of the defenders rather than leveling up with them, and that might be one of the differences. So I think yes, tactics are one aspect of it, but I do also attribute a lot of it to individual errors because um if you're a quality defender, right, and at the level that Chelsea aim to play at, you're going to need people who can defend in the recovery phase, right? In transition, when they have to have, they're facing a runner with the ball, they're getting spread, they have to be aware to make those sort of decisions. And I think um, you mentioned earlier that from our defenders, there's no one who can really walk into next season. I think there's only one player for me who could, and maybe two actually. That would be Reece James and maybe Cucurella. I think Reece James has been phenomenal, and he's an example of a player. And I mean, if you think back to when we had, say, Thiago Silva or John Terry, right? The reason it comes down to quality is because those were also players. It's not that under previous managers we haven't been in positions where we've been exposed on the transition, right? And they've had to recover defensively. I think where individual quality and IQ comes into the picture is when these players know where they need to be. Their positioning is on point. I think so far everyone in our squad, their positioning is not what it should be, right? If they're in the right position, right place, right time, they can anticipate where the ball's going. We're avoiding that. So tactics is one aspect for sure, but I think individually a lot of these players are just not cut out for the way we want to play. Chaloba, like you said, he's not necessarily a starter in a title challenging club. He is our starter, right? Between the rest of them, um, Fafana, Tosin, Badiashile, and Achimpong to an extent, there's no real like steady pairing happening, right? And Sar has come in, he's got one game. Um, so it's a little bit tricky to say that, it's just down to tactics, in my opinion. Um, I think there have been things that have been working in the tactics. There have been things that haven't been working. Defensively, it's not been working. Attacking, I think you called it out that, there has been a need for the second winger. I felt like versus Arsenal, there was a lot of time where we just didn't have any option to pass to on the left when we could have exploited the left flank, our left, that is. There was nobody to pass to because the way he set up, he had Neto on the right, Enzo Palmer floating behind João Pedro, right? You didn't have somebody sitting there, like a left winger. And yesterday, again, it was Garnacho who was really stretching the play. He was basically just hugging the touchline, and I think he had a really good game. So I think having two wingers is something that he needs to find a balance. And I think it's because he's trying to play Palmer. He's trying to exploit Palmer's, his creativity in the center. He has Enzo, who's also like really good playing, bringing the ball forward. So he's not finding a system where he can incorporate two wingers. But I think we need that, right?
Um, uh, I'm not sure I fully agree because again, it depends on your opponent, right? Yesterday we saw how effective you can be if you tend to just focus on playing in two out of three areas of the pitch. But yes, you will have games, for instance, against Arsenal, where maybe he should have adapted his system. So I hate to give this answer like, it depends, but it really does. Against the quality of the opposition you're playing against. Um, my thing is trying to get the best players you have all on the pitch at the same time. It's a pretty difficult thing to do, right? Because everybody has their pluses and minuses. Um, and I wonder how much of his system is impacted by the availability of his fullbacks. Going back to what you pointed out earlier, that obviously Reece James and Cucurella walk into the team next year. Um, yeah, I obviously agree with that. I was mainly talking about center backs and like the 8 to 12 center backs that we have uh, at the club or on loan at other places. Um, for me, yeah, nobody's cutting the mustard really if we want to challenge for a title next year. But when it comes to fullbacks, I would say we have really, really good options if they're used correctly. And again, if they're used correctly, then you don't feel the lack of width. So Hato, I really, really like Hato. He's 19 years old. He's got a bit of everything, and now it's just a question of getting the game time so he can improve in all aspects. But one thing you can already kind of tell he's not going to be good at doing is staying wide, and hitting the byline and getting a good cross in. The way he profiles more as like an inverted fullback that either stays along the back line, which we saw a little bit more in the second half against Villa, or somebody who inverts into midfield, because he has very good balance and awareness of the players around him, so he can at least hold the ball under pressure in central midfield and then progress it. And he's rapid, so his underlapping runs actually looked really, really threatening, even though Garnacho didn't tend to use them. So this is the thing, right? Like, I don't think he was employed in the right way against Arsenal. On the flip side, he was employed in the right way against Villa. Similarly, if you look at Gusto, I can't watch another game of Gusto inverting into any central area. It's just so. It's an experiment that we've seen over and over and over again, and I feel like we're doing it because we don't have another option, um, for somebody else to kind of float into the middle of the pitch. Gusto profiles as a flying right winger or right wing back. He needs to be touching the white of the line and just stretching the pitch as much as possible. Get him as far away from the ball as possible and just use his pace and movement. He's a very, very intelligent off the ball mover. He actually gets himself into great positions, but his technical ability lets him down. So that's a lot of detail, all of which to say that look, um, at fullback, I think we are okay, as long as, uh, as long as everybody's used to their strengths. I think Cucurella and Reece James are quite well rounded. They can both invert. They can both play on the wing. It's totally fine. But when you have Hato and Gusto, that's when you have to adjust the style of play, right? So that's why I say, in response to your question, how much is he impacted by that? Because his fullbacks are very, very important in the system. He wants them to do very specific things, and by specific, I mean he expects of them sometimes to even roam from their positions and pick up central areas. But if you're asking Gusto to do that, it's not going to be very effective. I've been getting very frustrated with Gusto recently, even, and he'll have like one good game in a span of 4 or 5. I don't know. Am I losing my shit a bit too much here?
No, dude, you're not the only one. I think Gusto's been frustrating a lot of people. It doesn't help that, I don't know if it's a consequence of playing in this manner where he's inverting a lot, but when he finds himself in those crossing positions, cross, his crossing itself seems to have, fallen off a cliff. The quality with which he was pinging balls when he first came versus how, his crosses are recently seems to have really, dropped off quite a bit. So that doesn't really, really help much. Um, but I mean, I take your point about the way he's using his fullbacks. I think there has been an overall improvement in the way we're moving the ball up the field. It seems to be getting from one end quicker. I saw you even said that, Jorgensen looked more assured on the ball last night. And his passing and distribution was better. I think there were some good link ups. I think Garnacho had a good game. João Pedro has just been on something else. I think he's um tallied with what Drogba did in his first season. I think I read that somewhere. So it's looking really good for him. But I mean, yeah, what's your take on that before we sort of move forward?
Well, let me ask you, when you picture Jorgensen in goal and you picture Sanchez in goal, right? Which one do you think is less likely to make a mistake right now?
I can't say for sure either of them. Honestly, that it might sound like a bit of a cop out, but I can't back either of them to say they're not going to make a mistake, right? To be honest, I was really surprised to see Jorgensen in the squad yesterday. I wasn't sure that he was available. And then I figure that, you have Wrexham at the weekend. It's the FA Cup. Why would you disrupt you every manager sort of follows that, right? Like their starting keeper is their league keeper and they have a cup keeper, right? So if anything, I would have expected Jorgensen to play versus Wrexham. Um, I think that, the goal we conceded early, it seemed a little bit soft. I don't know if he could have done anything about it. And then there were a couple of moments where he did have the ball. His distribution was better, like you said, but I feel like also there were a lot of nervier moments with him, like when he invited pressure from, I think it was Tammy Abraham towards the end of the game, where he tried to pick up the ball and Tammy tried to kick it and caught his hand. I think that was just a little bit unnecessary because the commentator also said it, right? You've seen your direct competition creating situations and putting their team under pressure. Why would you do the same thing? You know? And it's just because of that fact that I can't really say for sure that either of them are the right keeper for us in the long run. You know? Um, I think Sanchez, like I said, he can be prime Buffon or sideshow Bob depending on which day of the week it is, right? And that's really not reassuring. But I feel like recently his prime games, where he's playing really well, have been more than the mistakes. So for that, maybe he just edges it out for me because of recency bias and just availability bias. Um, yeah, that's my take on it. What about you? Were you impressed with
No,
Jorgensen?
no. I mean, it's a fair point, right? If we're talking about title challenging next season, which again might be a bit premature, but what are we in this for if we're not trying to win the Prem, right? So, uh, I tend to agree with you that yeah, we're probably not winning the Premier League with either of these goalkeepers. But one thing Rosenior will have to take note of going forward is no matter who he plays in goal, they're going to get pressed because both have basically shown that okay, under that kind of pressure, they actually can't. They don't seem to, they don't necessarily seem to find their way out of it, all the time. Which is fair enough, right? Like, I mean, it happens to defenders, it happens to midfielders when they're being pressed as well. But when a goalkeeper's doing it, it's much closer to their goal. That's point number one. But for me, like just going by eye test, I haven't actually like looked at the stats or any data for this. I think Jorgensen just seems more composed on the ball, which has its own mental impact on the rest of his defenders, I do feel like when Sanchez receives a back pass, the team is basically just already on edge and maybe they're taking a few steps back when they actually need to be making runs into the pitch or wide, giving him options. They're all kind of just watching to see what he's about to do. With Jorgensen last night, I was, I'm always impressed with his composure. Sometimes it's to his own detriment because he's too chill. Uh, but he's, even when he's being pressed, he does somehow find the correct short pass to play. And that's what this system requires. It's great to occasionally be able to go long to João Pedro, who, by the way, is somehow bringing balls down from the air with his head. He's got like the deftest head control. It's nuts. Like that goal against Newcastle earlier this season was absolutely crazy. But you can only do that so much, right? Before the odds go against you, and he eventually loses out to a William Saliba or a very strong defender, right? And Neto, Garnacho, if you're only playing one winger, there's only one side where you can run in behind from a long ball from the goalkeeper, and that's pretty predictable. So most of the time, Rosinia will want his goalkeeper to find that short passing option, usually a wall pass, right? And Jorgensen seems to do it more often than Sanchez. That's why I can again see him fitting the system better. Like you say, maybe Rosinia is like, look, he may have a free hit this season, even though he's talking the big game by qualifying for the Champions League. So he may see this as well, like, okay, why rock the boat at goalkeeper when there's so many other things that he needs to change. So yeah, that's why I ask, right? When you picture the two of them in goal, which one impresses you, or let's say which one, like, pisses you off less. For me at least, is Jorgensen, and coming to your second point, right, which is the ball is moving up the field much faster. Uh, I'm not sure about that. I think it's very aesthetically pleasing to watch a team try to play very intricately through the middle, and we have players who can do that. And Lavia coming back, touchwood, to some fitness will only add to our ability to do that, right? But uh, there were times against Arsenal where we were really trying to slow the game down as much as possible, but it was ending up to be in our detriment. And actually, had we played the ball faster, we would have had much better transitional opportunities. So, I mean, I feel like I'm noting both things, At sometimes he's allowing them to be more direct. And I think that was particularly useful against Villa, especially once we figured out that, okay, they're not actually pressing all the time. They're kind of baiting us sometimes. So against teams who are going to sit in a mid block sometimes, and they're not going to be as easy to bring onto the ball and play through, then we start looking for these over the top passes behind the back line, and that's when it gets a little bit more interesting. So I don't know. I feel like it's maybe slightly faster overall on average compared to Maresca, but again, probably depends on the opposition.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. Versus Arsenal, I do remember though, like when you talk about the defense, like the way Arteta set up with Gyökeres playing very close to um Chalobah and stretching him out just to create so much width between the center backs was really, something that was, I think it worked to their effect. But it's I'm glad you brought up the Arsenal game because I really needed to ask you this, right? Should we have had at least one penalty versus Arsenal?
Um, I can't remember. Honestly, I don't really pay too much attention to all of these, like, quote unquote, like, dubious scenarios. Um, which instances are you referring to?
So I'm referring to specifically Declan Rice, when he was defending the near post. I think it was Hato who he had his hands around, and then he moved his hand towards the ball, so it came off his elbow. And then later on, when Saliba again had his arms around João Pedro still managed to get up and jump for the ball, and Raya connected with him while punching it out. So in my book, when you look at those incidents and you look back at it, right? I think Declan Rice for sure should have been a handball, and I think there was a very good case of ball don't lie there because we scored on the next corner right after. So um, that you remember when we used to play basketball, so we'd always say ball don't lie when it was fouls. So I think that was really cool. But the Saliba on João Pedro and then Raya connecting with him, I'll give Raya the benefit of the doubt because he's a keeper. He's coming to, coming to punch a ball out. Maybe he's got all his eyes. I mean, all his eyes, as if he has more than two. He's got his eyes on the ball. But Saliba handling João Pedro like that, I feel like there was a case for that as well.
But what do you make of the officiating you've seen in the last few games? Because really, like, we never have a game where the referee just goes without any incident.
Dude, the officiating, I mean, we could do an entire pod episode on the officiating in the league and in England in general, and I think we still wouldn't get everything we want to say off our chest because it is so bad, right? I know you're mostly just watching Chelsea games. When I do get the opportunity, I watch Arsenal games with Niv and I watch some other games as well. The level of officiating, the consistency it's just crap. I mean, you see the exact same incidents being treated differently across different games, across different teams. And it's really, really, that's something that really gets my goat. So, without getting into that, I know you don't like it when I slag off the refs on our socials, so I've tried to not do that. But yeah, like I think versus Arsenal, at least that one should have been a penalty. And I mean, that's the sort of thing, right? Like it's those moments, it's those fine moments. Those like that decide how a game's gonna go, right? You have those officiating decisions that don't break your way. Like yesterday, João Pedro's was it his second goal where Garnacho crossed to him and Mings was it looked like he was offside. I mean, and then the automated the computer system it showed he was onside. But if you looked at it in real time, I thought it was going to be ruled out. Um, but it worked in our favor, right? Similarly, before that, Watkins was ruled offside. Very fine margins. I mean, it's coming down to those, and then of course the other aspect that is again those moments that decide games are just discipline, right? Like there was that graphic that I shared with you from that guy on Twitter, which basically said 11v11, Chelsea are the best team in terms of expected goals scored and expected goals conceded, right? That balance. So it just goes to show like there are these things that are out of our manager's control as well that, can really affect how the results, in which way the results fall, right? Whether in your favor or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I agree with what you said earlier, which is, those are the kind of moments that define a game. That's only the case in hindsight, right? But during the game, we can do more to affect the game than So
Sorry, I don't mean that they define the game, but those are the moments that you can look back on and say, well, what if, right? There are a lot of what if moments. Of course, I get what you're saying, right? There's a lot that's in your control, but the impact of these few things that are out of your control can also really affect the balance of play, is all I was getting at.
yeah, I mean, everything does, right? I mean, you look at, we were so wasteful when we actually had the ball in Arsenal's half of the pitch that you could wonder, well, what if we weren't so wasteful, right? So my thing is like there were actual points in that game where had we shown a bit more quality and a bit more endeavor, right, and a little bit more nous, we could have been more threatening versus Arsenal. And you have to admit, like we were pretty much non-existent going forward. Even though some of our play looked okay and some of the approach play looked nice, ultimately when we got into their final third, which was very rare, the quality was so poor. Um, and yeah, and like you pointed out, like I used to bash referees all the time, but then it made watching football so unbearable. So now I've just decided that look, let just leave the guy alone. He's just trying to get a paycheck himself. Let the guy be. And also, yeah, I don't really want to get like sanctioned by the FA about talking against their referees. So if I speak, I get in trouble. Shout out. Um, but this is one other thing I really wanted to ask you, and I mentioned it on X, right? That Arsenal game is a prime example. Palmer is going hot and cold right now, and actually against Villa, I don't think he played particularly well, even though he got the goal. Um, at what point do we kind of reduce our ratings of Palmer and bring him back down to like human level? And then we can kind of say, we can admit, okay, Palmer's not having a good game at like 55 minutes in, time to make a sub, or maybe he doesn't start a couple games. When do we start treating him like he's human?
So I 100% agree with you. He's not looking his best. Despite that, he still managed to get some key goal involvements um, since he's been back from this groin injury, which we still don't know if it's fully healed or not, right? But I think any manager, it's going to take someone who's really got, balls of steel, essentially, someone with like massive cojones to say, fuck it, I'm going to drop this player regardless of what the result is, because our fan base is highly fickle. And I think it's, we've been spoiled by decades of Roman and success, right? And now this new ownership is trying to also find their way. So I think no manager can have the luxury of saying, yes, you are the best player, because it doesn't matter how bad he's looking, there's still a possibility for one moment of brilliance to unlock a game. And I think it's that one moment of brilliance that managers continue to play him for, right? Whether he's not looking the best at 60, 65, you could say, okay, there's 25 minutes left in the game. He's not had the best game. We should remove him. That's probably what fans are also saying at that moment. But if he goes on to have that game changing moment, right, it's justified that you've played him. If you remove him and who you're bringing in for him doesn't have an impact, then you have to deal with fans and the what ifs. Why did we remove Palmer? Why are you taking off Palmer? He's your best player, yada, yada, right? So I think it's a very tough position for a manager to be in, more so when it's a young manager like Rosinia, who doesn't have a massive list of qualifications before coming to Chelsea. And I think that's a huge, huge factor that cannot be skipped when it comes to like a player like Palmer. Yeah.
Fair enough, right? And I think you mentioned a key point there, which is you basically only take Palmer off when you've got somebody else to bring on. And again, like I've made very clear, I've not been very clued in to the squad side of things in recent weeks. But I have no idea. Like Gittins is injured. We're rotating between having either Garnacho or Neto on the pitch because of the style of play. Uh, Palma and João Pedro are both starting. That really only leaves you Delap to bring on. Am I forgetting somebody? I mean, is Esteval back in the reckoning anytime soon?
I think Esteval is training. So Gittins is a long-term injury. He's not going to be they're saying could be back end of the month. Actually, I thought it would be later. Esteval should be back next week. Neto, of course, suspended. So it's not that his was in fitness related thing, right? So yeah, I mean, you're left with, if everyone's fit, you have Gittins, Garnacho, or Neto, whoever hasn't started, Esteval and Delap. That's basically it. And Mark Yu, who is not really getting a run out under um Rosina. I think we might see Gu over the weekend. I think the Wrexham game is an opportunity for a lot of rotation. And we should see a lot more of the squad being used versus the recent games in the league.
But I think my point is that there's actually not much squad left. Because even Hato's getting a run of games. Cucurella was, injured. Gusto and James starting games together. I'm again, that's not a long term approach. I can understand him doing it for Aston Villa because it was such a crunch match. But yeah, I mean, that basically leaves no room for rotation because all of these guys are playing together. And then if you look at our bench, it's pretty scant.
Yeah, it is. I still think like you see rotation in that. I think João Pedro, Enzo Fernandez, maybe a Palmer, maybe even a Caicedo get some rest there. Lavia gets a run out, starting after a couple of cameos. Santos was rested, so he definitely starts. You see maybe Tosin, Badiashile, Sanchez back in goal. I think that's the sort of rotation I'm looking at. Delap starting up front, I think we already said. But yeah, your main point was there isn't really somebody to replace Palmer with, to bring on to say this guy can actually affect the play, unless you maybe look at Estevao when he's fit, because he's had such good moments and they're sort of, building him up to Premier League pace and, just managing expectations with him. So maybe Estevao is someone like that. But yeah, I mean, it is where we are right now. And I mean, of course, squad building and transfers will be something we discuss. If not on this spot, it will definitely be something that we'll be discussing closer to the window, right? But I mean, at the sake of, not making this a really long episode, we are obviously now, uh, like I said, fifth in the league table as things stand. We are scheduled to play Wrexham in the fifth round of the FA Cup, and of course, we have the big fixtures versus PSG in the Champions League. So, given where we are, how do you think we're going to end the season? What are your expectations for the rest of the season?
I'm just going to go ahead and just talk about the next 5 games until the international break. I can't think past the end of this month, so you'll have to forgive me. But if I do, I think we're not qualifying for Champions League. I might have to retract what I said at the start of the pod. Um, I think Wrexham. It's quite funny because we've broken down what options we have in terms of rotation. I think we might struggle that game because he's got to find a way of managing Estevao's minutes and then squeezing. I would hope he tries to get Delap and Guigu on the same pitch, right, at the same time, because I want them both fit and firing for the crunch end to the for essentially for April. I'm not sure how many games we'll have in May, to be honest, but yeah, they both need to be like somewhat on form, right? So you want to get all of these players who haven't had much game time on there. You're looking at Badiashile and Tosin, and two strikers who aren't getting much game time. Estevao is coming back into fitness. It doesn't actually sound great, and Wrexham are doing pretty well for themselves, and we are away from home, so yeah. Basically, I'm beating around the bush. I think we're in for an upset here. I think Wrexham are going to knock us out.
No, that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't expect anything less from you. Um, I actually have been watching the documentary Welcome to Wrexham. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's basically about how Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney took over the club. And so I have a little bit more. I mean, I'm not up to date with it or anything. I've just watched it, and I know a little bit more about Wrexham than I did before that. I think yeah, they are building something there, and they've really brought Wrexham up through the leagues in the last few seasons. But I think that, like, for me, when I look at expectations, right, I think for the FA Cup we should be that's our best chance of silverware right now. It's not it by no means is it cut and dry, but I think that is somewhere that there is going to be a push. So I think we will go out wanting to beat Wrexham. The Champions League fixture, man, it's so we have PSG away, and then the following week on Tuesday. So Wednesday is PSG away, and then Tuesday is PSG home. And honestly, man, I think if we can get past PSG again, we should be able to get to the semifinals, because the next fixture, Liverpool versus Galatasaray, we play the winner of that. I think that's more manageable than the actual, the quarterfinal fixture potential is more manageable than the semifinal. Post that, I don't know if we make it to the semifinal, it's a Hail Mary whether we get to the final. But PSG, I mean, that's the big one, because obviously like have something to prove by beating us, right? I think they've applied to the league to get to the French league to get like of their fixture moved before the Chelsea fixture, so that they have enough time to prepare. We obviously are playing Wrexham on a Saturday, PSG on a Wednesday, Newcastle on a Saturday at home, and then PSG on the following Tuesday. So I don't think there's any real room for movement for our fixtures. But I mean, I can't call that PSG fixture. Both legs. I really don't know how it goes. I think away we obviously try to go minimize the number of goals we concede, maybe grab one goal, come back home and try to shut shop there, I think. But I mean, what are we saying? It's not like Stamford Bridge is the fortress it used to be. So I don't know, man. And then of course in between you have the Newcastle at home, and given given the way Newcastle have been, their form of late, I mean, yes, they grabbed the winner yesterday. Thank God for that. But I don't know if I mean, I think they're 12th in the table right now, so we have a better chance of beating them, I think. All right? What do you think? I mean, what's your take on PSG?
I mean, honestly, mate, I haven't actually heard any predictions from you. I think you just worried yourself for no reason. So once you live in this world where we get knocked out in the FA Cup by Wrexham, then it's fine, man. Then there's no expectations, Then there's no disappointment. So basically, I think it's going to be a 3-1 PSG in the first leg, and I think it's going to be a 2-1 Chelsea in the second leg. So we'll go out, what was that, 4-3 on aggregate? And in between, I think we draw against Newcastle. I do think, unfortunately, our defense is really bad, and sandwiched in between these PSG games, there's going to be a lot of minutes managing. Again, shout out to our previous pod where we're basically not sure who's actually picking the teams. I think we're going to be doing a lot of managing there. So I don't expect a full strength Chelsea at home to Newcastle. Um, and as I mentioned, we concede very easily. I rate, you know, Newcastle's team, at least on paper. So they know how to make things very difficult for us. And Everton away, I'm gonna say we sneak a win. And that's against my better judgment. And Prashant, you might be a little bit surprised, but it's probably a bit too early to say I'm a changed man.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'll ever be able to say that. So okay, for the sake of this pod, right? I think we beat Wrexham. I'm gonna be super optimistic and say we draw PSG away and we beat them 1-0 at home. So that's us going through to one on aggregate. And I think we beat Newcastle and Everton. I think I was a bit more conservative with the last Newcastle fixture, and we ended up beating them, right? If I'm not wrong. So I think we're gonna.
I think we drew that 2-2, right?
Right, you are actually.
That was the game I referred to earlier on where Sanchez goes long ball to Pedro and he somehow brings it down on his head, which is like absolutely nuts.
We went down. I'm just looking at the game highlights right now, but I think we'll do the job versus Newcastle. Because they really have nothing to play for in the league. I think they're gonna focus maybe a little bit more on, on the cup and everything. So, yeah, I think that's where we are with predictions. There was one bit of news that, came out of nowhere, but we have a new shirt sponsor. That was like the most random thing.
Yeah, it was random and it was pleasantly surprising because we all lowered our expectations. Wouldn't you agree? I think this is great news, even though again it's like one of those Damac things where there's a limited number of games till the end of the season and then we're back where we started. I don't know. I can't get too excited about this. And also, I don't think it looks great on the shirt. Like it's not very aesthetically pleasing. What do you think?
No, it's not at all. I didn't even know that we were working on this whole integration. So there apparently IFS.ai are going to be a global sponsor focusing on data-driven decision making. So then industrial AI um, software company, they use AI to optimize club operations, match day staffing, fan experience, player availability, yada yada. I think they're on as like a principal partner, and they got offered the, opportunity to also take on a front of shirt uh that placement for the rest of the season, right? I don't know, like to me, it's just it's just not smart because you've waited till 28, 29 games into the season or whatever to actually get somebody on your front of shirt, and that's like 28 games of or 28 weeks or whatever of wasted revenue, right? That you could have had, and in the hopes of getting a bigger deal, we have for the third year running let in I mean, if you look at the deal valuations, we've probably let about, I want to, a conservative estimate would be about 40 to 50 million over 3 seasons just go. And I think it really doesn't make sense. That's my take on it.
Dude, I'm pretty sure that's 40 to 50 million per season, right?
No, I'm saying
Because
I'm counting that they had something towards the end of the season, whatever it is. I'm just being very conservative and saying if they would have got like, say, I mean, being very conservative, 25 million a season, which is obviously really low. But if they were getting 25 million a season, and in each of these seasons, about two-thirds of the season is gone, that's how I'm arriving at 40 to 50 million, right?
yeah, actually, that makes sense. Um, and that I think if they need to think about it from their terms, how many youngsters have they passed up on just because they didn't have a front of shirt sponsor? I mean, think about the 16-year-olds they could have bought.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. No, but the other thing is also, I don't think they're clued into market dynamics, right? So a lot of current clubs' shirt sponsors are not going to be there next season because of the ban on betting companies. So, so the likes of like Villa, and I think they have Betano or whatever, and then there's 88 bet on some people, there's Stake on Everton, right? All these guys are suddenly also in the market for a new front of shirt sponsor. So what's the appeal to spend a chunk? I mean, Chelsea, I think historically the narrative has been that they're holding out for a value that they deem the club is worth, right? Clearly nobody else thinks the club is worth that. Now, in a market where suddenly every other club is there, and an Everton will probably accept half of what Chelsea wants, right? What do you do? Like, I don't think they're clued into that. It's not really smart from a business perspective, right? Basic supply and demand.
Yeah, the market has spoken. Totally agree with what you're saying. And I think we may see either they would look internally to see what maybe marketing they can do for one of their own brands under the Clear Lake Capital ownership, like in their portfolio of companies, maybe they can kind of use Chelsea's image for that, right? Um, but yeah, I thought that's something they would do this season, considering where we are. But I guess they really were holding out for a valuation, which in hindsight is very stupid. Um, and it all looks a lot worse when you think about the fact that we won the Club World Cup. It seems like a very long time ago now, but we won the Club World Cup. We qualified for the Champions League. We won the Conference League. And that's the season where you didn't have a front of shirt sponsor until March or February, I guess. So that it doesn't make any sense. We've probably covered this in a lot of depth already. Um, and again, this runs until the end of the season when we're back to square one. Um, you would hope that the additional funds that we receive from ifs.ai line the pockets for the transfer kitty in the summer.
Yeah, the reported deal value is only 15 million, so I guess that's what, 10 youngsters maybe?
Dude, we're out here paying like 30 mil per youngster, per kid.
A kid. Actually, yeah, you're right. So, yeah, well,
So maybe they can arrange a timeshare with like Endrick, Um, I think Real Madrid would actually not mind that, but yeah, I don't know. The way we also spend money is like it's a whole different podcast, right? Which we've again probably discussed in a lot of depth. Um, I don't know. I feel like maybe somebody more positive might say, well, at least they're securing some value at the end of the season. But it just raises more questions for me.
Yeah, dude, the number of things that we could do other episodes on, it just keeps increasing, right? Like we've already said, we could have done one on the business and on the transfers and on the officiating. It's never ending. I didn't know it would be this I guess I did actually. It would be this fun doing a podcast. So yeah, but I think with that, we're at the end of this one. Um if you Obviously, if you like what you've heard, if you'd like to share this with another Chelsea fan, definitely do so. Leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify. Follow us on X to keep in touch with Sharan's retrospective takes on all our games and my real-time reactions. And hopefully, we may have something brewing with an in-person recording sometime soon. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, that's it for me. Sharon, any parting words?
No, this is usually the part where I give my inspirational exit quote. Yeah, I know I look forward to, yeah, like you mentioned, hopefully recording in person together. It's been a while since we met, and I do hope I'm wrong. I just want to remind people that yeah, I do support the team. I watch every game, even though sometimes it's a replay. I enjoy the wins, but yeah, I think there's a lot of areas where we can improve. And look, if Rafinha's ceiling is similar to that of Maresca's, I think there's actually still a lot to look forward to. And dude, like you mentioned, right, just as you started to wrap up, whatever it is, it's at least it's interesting. Like we're still here, we still got stuff to talk about, right? So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly, man. So with that, on that slightly positive note, we'll call it on this one and see you soon, hopefully. All right, till the next one.